Hi guys, welcome to this first ever video on my YouTube channel. This is going to be a review of the Chucky series that came out in 2021. Stick around, it's going to be spoilers. Quickly summarize without spoilers. Show's pretty good. There's some things that are kind of wrong with it, but there's some nice moments. Chucky's great. Other characters great. Some characters not great. Let's get into the spoilers. Way more interesting. Before we get into the juicy stuff, first ever video on this new channel. Please check it out. Watch the whole thing. That'd be great. Like, subscribe. Check out the links below. I've got some other things, especially a podcast that I've started as well. Podcast is going to be a big source of content. Also, links to a Discord if you want to join that. Twitter, Instagram, I'll post things on there. Let's get into it. So let's start off with the spoiler discussion. Last chance now to pause and go watch it if you haven't seen it already. Obviously, it's 8 episodes. It's going to take you a while. Otherwise, here we go. I think Chucky is obviously the showrunner, and I think it should be because it's his show. He 100% has the best dialogue in the show. I think he has the most interesting scenes in the show, which obviously he should do because it's his show. And obviously it's nothing against the other actors. I think they all did a pretty good job. But generally speaking, like, his dialogue was just the most interesting part of any conversation that was happening. I really like the dummy work in the show. I think it was really, really good. I believe they said that most of the CGI in this was actually like removing people who are doing the dummy work. I would kind of pick to differ. We'll get into that later. But I do think that the dummy work was great. I like the swapping between dummies and real people. Kind of reminds me of like the first two films, and I think the later films sort of relied on that less. They wanted to show more of like the doll itself walking around, but maybe they think it breaks realism. I don't think it does. I think it actually adds more realism to see someone run around. It kind of helps you believe a little bit more that he can get to these places and can do all these things when you see him run around. And obviously I think it's kind of interesting and hilarious that they probably have some child running around with a knife in a house. The parents do a pretty good job in this show. There's a lot of interesting aspects, sort of like the two parents of Junior and Jake sort of being like two sides of the same coin, except one is sort of more out there and one's a little bit more malicious. Both, victims of their own trauma, especially when you think about the cancer reveal. Really like the cancer reveal. I think it's a very human reveal to not want to tell your family, and obviously the audience initially thinks, oh, she's probably cheating or doing something else. And I think it's kind of a good spin on that, and I think it's really human to see someone who doesn't want to tell the family of something that's pretty serious. I think that's very, very believable. I think the LGBTQ relationship is very, very good. I think the first kiss was 100% warranted and a good build-up. I was waiting for it, happy when it happened. Kind of wish they would have leaned a bit more into it. Sometimes it felt like it almost felt like they touched base with it and they were like, you know what, we're still going to make them look like friends though. That's like the main thing. It's just that they're really into each other as well. And it would have been nice to see more acceptance of the relationship, because if this sort of happened with a general straight couple, I think there would have much more gravity and weight to having one of them being kidnapped and put in a basement. And I think Jake was just kind of passive about the whole thing, sitting around like waiting until he decides to do stuff and then just sort of sits around more and gives up until everything's over. It seems a very like weird diversion on what like you would expect to happen when two people really like each other and one of them's in danger, especially when there's a serial killer involved. The first introduction to Chucky, the younger Chucky, I think was really, really good. Obviously, I think this was played by Fiona, who plays Nika, sort of under prosthetic and makeup. The first one was really, really good. At nighttime in clubs, all kind of like obscured. It really sold the believability, and the voiceover work was pretty decent. It had me kind of fooled for a little bit. This sort of, I think, wears off after a while. I don't think that the Tiffany, younger Tiffany, and the voiceover for that worked a lot. We'll go into that a bit later. I do think, though, that Fiona does do a lot in this show. She gives a lot, especially in the later part of the series. I think she carries most of the narrative, because without it, there's kind of not really much going on. The first half of the series was really about Chucky and Jake, and it was kind of this like relationship and building up and getting Jake to do stuff. And then when that kind of failed, there wasn't really much left. So they introduced Tiffany and they introduced Nika again, and things instantly got more interesting. And this is where all the backstory stuff came in. Some of the backstory was good, some of the backstory was bad. I liked all the stuff as him as a child, 100%. I think everything, seeing Chucky as a child throughout different stages of his life, I think was really cool. Seeing how he got into murder and that kind of thing. Kind of weird, to be honest. Like, really, really weird. And I don't know if, this is believable, but this is now set in stone, and this is, I guess, now law. So, yeah, this is what happened. he killed his mum. The return of Christine as Kyle was good. Again, I think this is because they really relied a lot on the second film for this. Apparently had like some of the best audience sort of reactions, and they wanted to recreate that vibe and aesthetic. I think they do. I think it also feels a lot more modern. Definitely tries to play on a lot of more of the more modern things like Stranger Things and stuff like that. That sort of like, teenager focused thing. A lot of high contrast and a lot of color. Kyle was really good. I think it was kind of weird with Kyle because like it didn't feel like Kyle, and I think part of this is because we didn't have a lot of information of like how she got to this point with Andy, and like, it would nice to have seen a bit more of Kyle's backstory, especially because we've had a bit of Andy's already in the previous films. Otherwise, Kyle just sort of I don't know, feels like some random thing thrown into the mix for the sake of like throwback. It would have been nice to see a little bit more depth to her and give the actress like some time to shine, because she's a good actress and she's been in a lot of things, and it would have been nice to see her like, own the role a bit more and feel like Kyle. Feel like Kyle, but at a different stage in life. This didn't feel like Kyle to me. This just felt like, I don't know, a badass with a gun. So of course we have to talk about things that don't work. And I think for me there's, unfortunately, quite a bit in this film that just didn't work. And I think the biggest, most jarring thing in this is the CGI. I get it, CGI these days has become really, really easy and really convenient, and it's become a lot better and a lot easier to mask things that look kind of cheap. But man, I feel like, people might disagree, but I feel it's kind of unforgivable in any kind of like slasher film or horror film to have every single like drop of blood be CGI, except from blood that's on people's face. We need to see some practical stuff, or otherwise it just does not look believable. The head rolling on the floor of sort of like the head teacher looked like the fakest thing ever, and it kind of sets a bit of a tone for the series because it really makes it feel like they don't care about the quality of the visual stuff that's going on, which then means, okay, there needs to be more about the writing, and there's not really a lot in the writing that's very solid either. So it kind of falls in this very weird thing where like the show is being carried by the actors, and that is it, in my mind. There's some blatant continuity errors in this as well. It becomes really, really graphic. You're talking like, really basic stuff where like two people are having a conversation, and the second the camera switches from one camera to another camera, the blood's in a different place on the face and on the clothes. It's like almost like a completely different day, and they've reshot them, and it just becomes really obvious as well because when the camera flicks a lot, you can see it. It's almost like showing like a before and after. It becomes really distracting. The ADR in this film, the automated dialogue replacement, is everywhere. That first episode with that kid, where it's so blatantly obvious he replaced his entire voice, including in the second episode when he, like, I think it was the second episode where he died in that, like, pie or something. Absolutely mental.
That was not cool. I'm really sorry. Having a party tonight, and I think it'd be really good for you if you came. Costumes, Coronas, and candy. And we're not talking M&Ms.
And sometimes this kind of set the tone for the rest of the series, where I actually think subtly there's so much ADR in there that it's actually hard to tell like who's actually saying proper dialogue in the show at the time. And it almost takes you out because it almost feels like the dialogue is so clean and so edited that it doesn't feel like we're having a conversation outside or a conversation in a room. It feels like so much of the audio was recorded separately and added in. And for some things, it has to be, which makes sense, okay? So, like, the younger Tiffany, it has to be. The younger Chucky, it has to be. Because those actors don't have that voice. So that needs to be there. Even, like, the mayor sometimes had moments where I'm looking at her talking and I'm like, is this actually coming out of your mouth right now? Or was this recorded later? And I think if it becomes that distracting, there's an issue. Another issue for me was Devon's mum, who was sort of like the inspector. I was like, all right, okay, there's like a crime element to this. Makes sense. Where's this going to go? Didn't go anywhere. Second she died, and second the other guy died in the hospital, there was no police ever again. No one cares about all these murders anymore. No follow-up, no junior detective, nothing. No police, gone. The police only showed up right at the end, I guess, and that's because there's an explosion and it's going to be hard to ignore that. I think the hospital episode was really, really bland. And it almost felt like filler, which I think in a series of 8 episodes is mental. There's so many series that just wish they clearly had more episodes because they couldn't fit everything in. And to have filler in an 8-episode series like this, I think is crazy. It also had the stabbing with the needles, which was just the most unbelievable thing ever, that would actually kill anybody. And most of the series was just spent, wondering where Chucky is. He's gone down this corridor, and then there's all the stuff at the house, and it's just like, how did you get to the house and in the hospital at the same time? We hadn't even properly established at this point that, there was multiple Chuckies, and it even didn't elaborate if they were separate Chuckies from each other. It just became very, very, bizarre. I really just didn't like that episode. I think one of the other really big issues with some of this as well, speaking of filler, is just music. There's so much loud music in this series, it's insane. And I'm not saying the songs are bad. The songs are good. Sometimes the songs kind of fit what's going on, or it kind of fits the vibe and the aesthetic of what's going on. I can 100% say to you now that I believe that some of this music was put in there to just replace dialogue. It was scenes just didn't work for this episode, so they cut them out, put in a montage, and put loads of music over it. Situations where sometimes, I swear, in some episodes, there was 2 songs back to back with montages that lasted 10 minutes. And that is just absolutely crazy. If there's no dialogue and there's no content going on a show and they're just showing music, it means it's because they have nothing to say in this episode. There's nothing to say. Or at least there's parts of it they want to say, but they can't say it all at once, because that means there's not an hour's worth of content. That is a real big issue for me. I think the other kind of final big gripe that I had about this series was some of the acting from some people was considerably quite bad. I think as much as I love Jennifer Tilly, I think her Tiffany in this was just overly childish. This is some of her voice sometimes was almost baby territory. And I was just she was so edgy in Bride of Chucky, and she was so edgy and cocky in all the other films, and in this she's a child.
Don't get me started on Andy Barkley, bro. You should have seen the look on his face when I whacked his babysitter.
Chucky! We did it! Chucky!
In a minute.
Jesus Christ, huh?
Literally a child sometimes, with her baby voice crying, and her allegiances swap every 2 seconds depending on who gives her the remotest bit of positive feedback. Whoever remotely shows that they like her, she shows allegiance to, and this just completely baffles me so much. I did like the reveal with the doll at the end, and the doll kind of looked like she had a little bit of attitude, but it just did not work for her as a character. She actually became really annoying, and I actually just hated watching her on screen because it just did not feel like Tiffany. So in terms of a final verdict, I guess the issue is that I didn't feel like the series was moving towards a particular end goal. There was no overarching narrative where I felt okay, this is where the story is going. It kind of felt like you could cut the series in half and it'd be 2 separate things altogether. And maybe this is because there's multiple writers for different episodes, and multiple directors for different episodes, which means things just never feel consistent and very continual. The first half of the series was very intimate and very slow. It was Jake and Chucky and the sort of backwards dialogue and sort of this influence and all these questions about morality and can we be pushed to do things that are unthinkable. And then the second half of the series, you got Jake and everyone else just becoming kind of more the backseat, while you have Andy and Kyle and Tiffany and Nika sort of taking the front run, and all that was building to this grand narrative of having an army of Chuckies, yet there was nothing alluding to this earlier in the show. It was kind of it felt halfway through they were oh, right, we need to throw some more people in now to make this interesting, and let's bring back all these original characters. I would like to have seen a bit more of this from the beginning. Maybe start it with Andy or someone else. Anything like that. All in all, though, there's a lot of stuff in the show that is really, really good. I think the comedy is good. I think Chucky's good. I think the characters, for the most part, are really, really solid. Get past the jarring CGI and the jarring like ADR, and you'll be absolutely fine. And it's a really good input into the Chucky franchise and Chucky lore. And we'll have to see what Series 2 has to offer. So to wrap this up, I'm going to give this relative like a 3 out of 5. I think that's pretty fair for this show. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please check out the links. Please like, share, subscribe, all the good stuff. And let me know what you think. We'll see you on the next one. Come check out the podcast. Podcast I'm going to try and do every Tuesday. YouTube videos will be every Saturday. So, yeah, we'll see you in the next one.